Alright, AB video number 1. This is our AB dinghy. And I don't know if you can read the serial number there or not. Serial number for our AB dinghy. As you can see, we filled it up with water so that we can see where all the leaks are on the outside. So I'll just take you around to the first one, around the back of the dinghy. And this is the only one actually, where we can see that there is a visible hole where the hypalon is separating from the aluminum, and we're getting quite a big leak through this area, as you can imagine. So that's number 1, and again, it's the only place where we see sort of that gap between the hypalon and the aluminum. I'm going to take you around to the side of the dinghy now. This is the starboard side. I'm going to go underneath. Bear with me for a moment. And you can see we're quite a good leak on this one. Alright, so if we just orient ourselves under here, we have a leak between the seam that holds the aluminum onto the hypalon. And in this case, unlike the previous one, there's no obvious gap. You can go along with your finger, and there's no gap between the hypalon and the aluminum. So it looks perfectly fine. If you just turn the dinghy over on a normal day, you'd never be able to see anything, and yet we have water basically running out of what is essentially a closed seam. So that's problem number 1. If we go along a little further up the dinghy, you can see problem area number 2. Just bear with me while I wiggle up there. Okay, so again, in this case, we've got a seam where there's no visible gaps. I can run my finger all the way along there, feels perfectly fine. And in this case, it's a bit different from the previous one. It's not between the aluminum or this first seam between the aluminum and the hypalon, it's the second seam. So same piece, of course, but the seam that basically is now just joining it onto the hypalon. And you can see we've got a pretty good healthy stream of water coming out of that as well. And again, no gap between the hypalon here. Feels perfectly normal. Alright, bear with me while I stand up and go around to the port side of the dinghy. And we have yet another one here. The longer you wait, the more leaks you find. Which is very depressing. Okay, we go under here. And again, similar sort of situation. No gap between the hypalon and the aluminum, yet we're getting a pretty healthy water stream coming through. There's also another one at the back on the other side, but I think you're getting the idea that we're having a major failure in this piece of hypalon that attaches the aluminum to the pontoons. So it's basically just like the glue is starting to give out, and that's a big problem for us. Thanks.